To the second edition of Lives and Lessons in the Underrepresented in STEM. This is, as promised, 6 months later, we are having this conversation again. So it's great to see you guys all here, and I'm just going to start off with a little introduction on why these things are so important, give you some tools for your toolbox for the conversation, get your gears turning, all these things engineers like. And I am not an expert at these things, but I am an engineer myself, and I've attended many conferences on these conversations, so I'm just going to relay what I think is some of the most important information to have going into this conversation. First of all, everyone has unconscious bias. This is not something that anybody can really escape living in today's society. It's the way we're raised, it's our experiences throughout our lives, and so everybody really has a tendency to think that certain people are more capable than others, or more likely to share certain positive or negative characteristics. It's what we do with this bias that really makes the difference, and how we address it, and we can all recognize it in ourselves if we put in the work and put in the effort, and you're all making that first step being here right now. So unconscious bias can lead to more disruptive things like objectification, discrimination, stereotypes, and microaggressions, which all has a hand in the underrepresentation we see in our fields. And some of these words, we're definitely going to get to them in the discussion. Something like maybe microaggressions you might not be super familiar with. Just an example from my personal life. Telling somebody that I'm an engineer and then being very surprised, saying, oh wow, engineering's really hard for girls. No, engineering's just really hard. But these are the kinds of things that, they didn't have malintent. They didn't mean to hurt me, but it makes me reflect on who I am and if I'm really capable in the field that I am, and which I am. So these are the things that contribute to that. And another part of all this is privilege. And privilege isn't just about what you have, it's about what you do not have to navigate. So everybody has their own privileges, their own sets of advantages that they have, and not everybody has to deal with these things throughout their lives. But you're living in a society where your friends do and your peers and your colleagues do, so you have a responsibility to use that privilege to lift up the voices of others and make sure you're not making it harder for anybody than it has to be or already is. So instead of looking at diversity like it's an issue for one set of people to fix or something that only a few people deal with, it's really an opportunity for all of us to come together and be more compassionate and be more collaborative and be more successful engineers overall. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. Google, Johnson & Johnson, Lockheed Martin, Rockwell Collins, Rockwell Automotive, these are all organizations and companies that I've seen speak about their own efforts with diversity and inclusion. And they've done studies to prove that, yes, homogeneous groups do produce faster results, but when you have a heterogeneous group, they usually come up with the most creative and effective solutions. So as engineers, I think we can all agree that a more creative and effective solution is where we want to be. So we want to make sure that we're in groups where everybody is different and not everybody thinks the same way, because it can be challenging, but that's why we're all in this field, it'd be like a challenge. And SWE, for SWE, did our own study where we surveyed 40 female students at Drexel, and 80% said that they have experienced sexism in engineering. And these are students. They're not even really, yes, we have co-op, so it's people have been on co-op and in the classroom who are saying already 80% of them have experienced this, and 95% say that they would like to see more of their male professors and peers advocate for women in STEM. So this is just a very small piece of the puzzle. Of course, there's so many other levels of diversity that we should be looking at, but this is just one study from SWE. And I could throw numbers out there all day, and there's a lot of them, but that's not really going to change how you think or feel about this issue, or these opportunities. What's really going to make a difference is seeing the names and the faces and hearing the stories of people that are affected by this system and learning new ways that you can improve just by being who you are and being a good friend and really reaching out to these people and caring. So if everybody can just listen to these panelists and ask questions, please participate. You all have your own lives and lessons and your own questions, so don't be afraid to raise your hand, ask a question. We will have somebody running a microphone, but we also have our awesome moderator, Nora. Where is she? You want to come up? Come on, welcome to the stage. Nora is, yes. Nora's the best. She's been in SWE as long as I have. She's a junior biomedical engineer involved in lots of things on campus, philosophy club. I don't know if you want to say more about you, you can. And also, thank you so much to our sponsors. Without them, this couldn't happen. They got the food, they got the public safety, so we can all be safe and well fed for this event. And all of the orgs to the right of the screen are actually out there today. And if you want to learn more about them and get to know them and their missions, they will be out there to talk to you. And thank you to our panelists. So our panelists for the academia portion can come up and take a seat. And you guys can introduce yourselves when you're there. Thank you. Please enjoy the event.
Good afternoon, everybody. So as Jackie said, my name is Nora. I am a junior biomedical engineer, and I'm also the public relations director for SWE and the director of He for SWE, our gender equality initiative. So as a quick introduction, also kind of housekeeping, we have Snapchat filters that I was reminded to remind you of. We also have a hashtag for this event, hashtag Lives and Lessons if you're talking on Twitter. Also, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them, or any feedback, feel free to give it on Twitter. We'll also be sending you out a feedback form afterward. So we're about to kick off the first of our panels today. We have an academia forum. So I guess let's just start with who you are. No research talks. That's not what we're here for. We are here for a lovely conversation on gender diversity and your own experiences. So it's one thing to talk about how important it is that we have this conversation, but really the end goal is always the people. So we have people here who will tell you about themselves and kick this off. So if we could just go, that'd be wonderful. Who are you? What are you doing here?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So because we're academics, we expect, responses. But my name is Michelle Rogers. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I am here just to share, really to hear your questions about, being in a field that you don't necessarily have other people that look like you or understand your perspective, right? So my undergraduate work was in electrical engineering, and I graduated with the Bachelor of Electrical Engineering and then realized I really didn't want to be an electrical engineer. And people started talking to me about another field called industrial engineering, which Drexel used to have, actually. And then I went on to get my PhD in industrial engineering to understand people's systems and technology. So that kind of falls in line with understanding people and knowing, and as I talk to engineers, as I talk to clinicians, because most of my work is in medicine, I realized that without understanding what people do with whatever technology you're designing, if you don't understand how people actually use it, regardless of how you designed it, regardless of the documentation you wrote up about it, if they don't understand, if they're not understanding it, if it's not a part of their workflow, then they're not going to use it in the way you designed it. So even if you don't like people, you want to spend your whole life in front of a computer or in a lab, you need to understand people. And part of understanding people is knowing that we're not all from the same place. Two people from the same city may have had totally different experiences. And so while I was in electrical as an undergrad, it could be totally different from what an electrical does now even. So that's me and why I'm here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mel. I'm a fourth-year graduate student at Columbia University. My undergrad is in engineering physics, and I'm now working in applied physics there. I'm up here, I think I've done a lot of work with student groups, both in the Society of Women Engineers as an undergraduate, and then starting chapters of OSTEM, which is a group for LGBTQ identified people in STEM, mostly in universities, and then we coordinate with professional societies that are affiliated as well, and I've started those at both Wisconsin and now at Columbia. And yeah, I really just, I work in plasma physics, which is a whopping 4% women, and I think even fewer people of color. So I've been trying to do a lot to push my fields to become a little bit more diverse and acknowledge that there is value to that, and that's why I'm here today.
Hi, I'm Michelle Ravinsky-Mayer. I'm here at Drexel. I'm an administrator. I oversee the Office of Equality and Diversity. I'm really happy to be here. I think that there are no experts in this area, and that we really just sharing our experiences and learning from one another. My career has been as a litigator in the area of civil rights, addressing issues, Title IX issues, race and ethnicity, discrimination, harassment. And I came here in 2008 when I started to look at the gap that stood in front of the area of opportunity for resolving issues of discrimination and harassment before litigation. So I trained as a mediator, and I saw a real opportunity there, and then joined Drexel to oversee the Office of Equality and Diversity. And what I'm learning a lot about, and through hearing stories and addressing issues here at the university, is there's a great opportunity for what we all can do to address issues of inequity, prevent discrimination and harassment on the early end, and not waiting until it becomes a real major issue that it ends up in, I need to go outside the university to get relief, something major is happening. So learning about conflict resolution, building inclusion, and supporting people working in diverse groups. And I agree with the moderator saying that diverse groups make better decisions. Sometimes they aren't as fast because there are things you need to navigate. And I know that in the Office of Equality and Diversity, we work in diverse teams, and I every day see the benefit of that, how we make better decisions, whether it's from the Title IX perspective. The university has done a lot of work in the Title IX arena, and we have a Title IX team that's pretty diverse. And sometimes it takes a while to get to a resolution or a decision on what we need to do, but hearing multiple perspectives, I'm convinced that that's how we make better decisions. So I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. All right, so I'm going to kick things off very, very quickly. If you could describe your path in STEM in one word, what would it be? Just your whole story put into that word. How would you communicate that? Maybe part of your story.
I'm going to go with arduous.
Okay.
That's my one
really
word.
good one.
I'll go with evolving.
And Michelle, I know your background is not in STEM.
Yeah, I'm not in STEM. but I did spend the majority of my career in the legal profession, and there are similarities in challenges between engineering and the law profession. So I would say unique path. I would just say unique path. My trajectory through my career has been unique.
So you've all taken winding paths to get where you are today. Very, very winding. And I wanted to ask, what has been sort of a driving force in doing what you do in litigation, in teaching, in research? But have you ever seen your identity become kind of a part of that in the perception of other people? Have you seen other people look at what you're doing and make assumptions or hinder your path? And how have you experienced that in getting where you are today? What is just some example of that really sticks out to you? Whether it was a driving force that sent you forward, or whether it was something that sort of made you take a look back and maybe pivot to another career path or something else that you were thinking about doing.
I can start since I'm the least far down a career path right now.
All right.
So for me, something that's really influenced my persistence in graduate school in the moments when it gets really difficult, or I've experienced microaggressions and it makes me really just want to not have to deal with it anymore, has been that I started at Columbia. It's called the You Are Welcome Here campaign, and it started at MIT several years ago. And you make a little sticker, some modification of your school's logo, and it's rainbowified in some way. And it just says, "You are welcome here" on the bottom. And the idea is that people can stick this on their office door, and then without anyone ever having to out themselves or say anything, they can know that they can feel safe around that person. And so this was not a thing when I was a prospective student, and it led to a lot of very awkward trying to figure out how that would go over in my department, which is why I started this. But after that has happened, there has been a very notable increase in the fraction of openly LGBTQ identified students in my department. A couple of prospective students, even if they chose not to come to Columbia, specifically mentioned that to me as something that was very influential for them and they really enjoyed and wanted to replicate at whatever campus that they went to. And so having moments like that is kind of what's kept me around, is to know that my presence and the things I'm doing to try and widen the path behind me really are doing something.
I would say for me, it's I'm not really a loud and boisterous person, and especially at the beginning of my career, when people would know that I am a lawyer, they would, "You're a lawyer?" They imagine someone who is really boisterous and kind of out there and kind of forward moving. I was really effective, and I think I've been really effective in my career. And what I learned is that I couldn't judge myself based on what other people saw as a lawyer, because I was effective. And as I began to really trust myself and what makes me effective, I started to learn, and I said before, I would characterize the word for my career path it was a unique trajectory through my path. I went from being a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor handling a range of cases up to homicide cases, and then I went into civil litigation and did civil rights cases, and then conflict resolution, and now I'm here. So I would say that over my when I say, okay, that's very interesting, but kind of believing in yourself and knowing, kind of that deep knowing of self and what you want from your career is the path. It has been my path to success, is really knowing me and not thinking that I had to be someone else's attorney, like their vision of what an attorney would be. And I feel like that was a really big lesson for me.
I think for me, the thing that has kind of pushed me forward is that I've always been in a field and in an area that there have not been a lot of women. So, as I said, I'm from Brooklyn, and this high school I went to had only started admitting girls approximately about, let's say, 15 years before I got there. So there were still not a whole lot of women that went to that high school. Like, so some of our bathrooms still had urinals in them. Like, they had not transitioned over the bathrooms yet. So it was automatically, so you already knew that you were going to be in classes. There weren't going to be a lot of other female faces in class. So when I decided to go into engineering, I kind of knew there weren't a lot of women, but it never kind of dawned on me that it would be the same as high school was, right? So I guess I never saw it as something that I had to overcome, because it was just a way of life. And so Jackie talked about privilege and having to, that the concept really behind privilege is the fact that there are things you don't have to navigate. And so there are just some things that men just don't have to navigate. And I think from 14, I've had to always be where, in lab groups, as some of you may be able to relate, they always assume you're going to be the note taker. They're going to always assume you don't want to do the activity. But I guess it just never seemed as a hurdle, because since high school, I've always been in classes where I've been in the minority, gender-wise. And then as I got to college, racially, but I started out college at Spelman College in Atlanta, which is all women. And I appreciate all that I got there, and would never, I would always make that same decision to do a dual degree, because from there I got the foundation that I could build upon for years and years and years to come. So I think for me, I've kind of always been in this position, And unfortunately, teaching in CCI, I still see classes with 4 and 5 women, in classes of 25 to 30. And that part of it breaks my heart, that it's still the same numbers from when I was in school.
I'm really interested in learning when you started to become conscious of this. You touched on this, Michelle, with, it doesn't feel like it's something that you need to overcome. I know that for me growing up, it was always sort of, I almost internalized it to the point that looking back, I knew how to use that to an advantage. The fact that people were always surprised when I did something, even if it was kind of average otherwise. And even though we didn't get the support that we needed at the time, it's still very powerful to keep moving forward in a way. But it's, when you look back and you see, my goodness, there was all these obstacles in my way, and I just didn't even recognize them as such. When did you start becoming conscious of the fact that there were these obstacles in your way because of who you are?
So I think the experience that really crystallized things for me, because I had kind of a similar thing where there weren't as many women in science classes in my high school, even though we were, I think, a more gender equitable high school in general, because we were just the high school for my town. But as you got to the point where science classes became optional, the fraction of women really decreased. But I wasn't really paying attention at that point, and so then going from that to college engineering courses, I don't know that I noticed it right away either, especially because the women would kind of find each other and bond very quickly. And so my best friend in the world, I met the first day, my freshman year of college, in our intro to computer engineering class, because we were 2 of the 6 women in a class of 75. But then my junior year of undergrad, I was taking one of my required lit courses, and for our midterm project, we had to write a paper about some facet of our identity that we felt was in some way misunderstood, misinterpreted, affected how people saw us in a way that wasn't always accurate. And I chose to write mine on identifying as pansexual because I'd had a lot of really both positive and negative experiences with that, and I thought it'd be a good growing experience for me to write about that in my paper. I didn't really know how to write about it, and so I just went to office hours and kind of spewed an hour worth of these are all of my thoughts, help me turn this into a paper, please, at my professor. And I left that conversation and then went home, started feeling kind of bad, and didn't leave my apartment for 3 or 4 days. And I'm very, very grateful. A friend realized that I had stopped showing up to things, came over, and was like, what is wrong? Why are you not leaving your apartment? And it took a while of us talking for me to figure it out. But in that conversation with the professor, she kept challenging my kind of right to claim queer because I could pass as straight, especially at the time I hadn't cut off most of my hair yet. And so she was like, well, if you can pass, does that really count? If you happen to be dating a man at the time, people will read you as straight. Does that really count? Why haven't you come out? If you're going to be queer and not look it, you have to come out all the time. And that was a really hard experience for me to process. And I wasn't equipped for it at 19 or 20. And so without realizing it, just shut down. I'm still very grateful that someone came over and kind of talked to me enough to process me through that. So that was the first time I really became aware. And then the second was graduate school. A lot of the stereotypical gendered microaggressive sort of things about if a woman raises her voice, she's hysterical. I get treated very differently based on the amount of makeup I wear by certain faculty members. And so those were the sorts of things that I hadn't experienced as an undergrad, but my field's 4% women, so I've definitely experienced since starting graduate school, and figuring out how to navigate that would have been the other big one. I don't remember, there's supposed to be an uplifting ending to that. I don't remember the question.
I was not expecting that faculty ending, though. Yeah, okay, makeup faculty. Oh, that's not okay.
Right. I think I most remember in high school, so this is how I'm showing my age, we didn't have typing as a class, so I'm not that old. But there were typewriters in our class, and the teacher that had the class would he encouraged us to learn to do typing in the front, and he was also the basketball coach, and so all of his players would go just sit. The room had 2 parts, and all of the basketball players would come in his class, and they would all go to this little back area, And they were able to just hang out there all they wanted. They didn't have to do this typing part. And I just remember being really upset that he had, they didn't have to do this part. They could just be basketball players and be, in the back. Because I was also an athlete at the time. And so we could go away sometimes, but it was never during that kind of gendered typing kind of activity. And so I remember that must have been my sophomore or junior year in high school when I remember that happening. But it was very stark to just see how they just saw something different between, even though, okay, yes, we're both athletes, but because they play basketball, they don't have to, because they're guys, they don't have to learn how to type. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting.
I would say my realization came after law school. I went to Temple University School of Law, and it was a very diverse experience. And really there were probably almost equal amounts of female, male. It was after I graduated and started working in the real world, and I think looking back, it was because when I went to law school, the people there, that was the area that they were growing up in, and more gender diversity. When I went out into the field, I was in court with people who had gone to law school years ago who didn't have females in their class or had a few females in their class. So it was a very different experience. And I experienced a lot of aggression, aggressive attitudes, kind of dismissiveness, and kind of being treated like someone's daughter. So that took a bit getting used to, so that was my first experience of going. The law school experience was I didn't particularly enjoy the law school experience. I really didn't feel different in terms of my gender, or that was an issue until I got to the DA's office and interacting with the judges and other attorneys who had been practicing for many years.
I would like to ask you all as academics, or at least people who are still all the time at a university and regularly dealing with people who don't know how to respond to what you're saying, what do you think the responsibility is of an academic administration or faculty to respond to student and faculty and staff needs as people who are working in these spaces?
I can say one thing, that I think it is our responsibility as educators to make sure that we include in our subject matter representation of all types. So many times in the intro to information technology, or even in my health informatics, I used to teach health informatics to graduate students. My students had to learn about Henrietta Lacks and the ethics that are involved in taking people's cells without their permission or their understanding, or continuing to use that family to get data, to use that data to start a biomedical industry, right? So I think that it is the onus is on us to help students begin to learn those things, so we don't keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And you can't say that your topic doesn't have any kind of relevance to gender, race, sexual orientation. Everything, we're all people. So we all have these issues. And so there are people that you can point out, just like you talk about Albert Einstein. You can talk about the women who worked on the ENIAC computer at Penn. There's no reason why we can't have all of these discussions at the same time. As academics, we have to help students begin to give voice to their concerns. We can't keep making groups in our classes where we put one girl in every group, so that the woman has to then, stand on her own and have to, whatever she comes up against. We can't keep doing that. There are just things that, as faculty, we have to help. And then as Michelle can tell you, faculty aren't trained on this, right? So you go to graduate school and then they just throw you in the classroom when you come as an assistant professor. You're not taught very much about pedagogy. You're not taught about Title IX at all. And so there are things that you learn on the job. And so unfortunately, faculty are learning along with you.
Yeah, I would say that faculty need to be educated beyond their subject matter in the pedagogy, but beyond pedagogy, to understand that it's not just, it's about representation, but it can't just be about representation. We have we have women in engineering. We have it has to be it has to move to inclusion, and so inclusion, having one female or one person of color in a group is. Faculty need to understand the dynamic. If they want to be effective teachers and mentors and leaders, they have to understand the dynamics that are created in their spaces. They have to own that space. So I really believe consistently educating themselves and being aware, really aware of what's happening in their classrooms from the different perspectives of the people in there. And so we're doing more. We're trying to do more, and I am committed to doing even more to help in that partnership to educate faculty in that space.
Yeah, I would really echoing the education of faculty as a key component. An unfortunate reality is that most faculty, not all but a lot, will not take the time to opt into these various diversity and inclusion trainings because they've got a million other things going on, and they think that if they are not consciously biased, that is good enough. One of the female faculty in the astronomy department at Columbia has put together a really great presentation where I think the most salient slide for me was they've scored their accomplishment based on, I think, number of first author papers and prestige of the journal they were published in, and then perception of accomplishment. And the most accomplished 10% of women were perceived as being as good as the average man. And so things like that where faculty don't really realize that just thinking that they're unbiased is good enough. And so really, like from administration, the thing to do there is to try and force the faculty to engage with this. And like trying to force faculty to engage with anything is hard. I'm totally acknowledging that. But at the same time, if the faculty aren't going to engage voluntarily, and the faculty are the people who have such a strong influence on the students and interact with the students so much, then that is kind of where you have to go. And the moments of allyship when the faculty are really educated and do little things matter so much. I had a moment where someone, when I got called hysterical for raising my voice, where some male colleague stood up and was immediately like, you know that was a very gendered thing to say. You would never call me hysterical if I raised my voice, and just shut it down. And that helped so much because I didn't have to say anything. And I've been telling that story for like a year now, and the friend thinks it's ridiculous that story means so much to me, but it really does.
Yeah. So somebody asked a question. We had a space in our RSVP form where people could ask their own questions. And somebody mentioned, do you think that change happens on a logarithmic or a linear scale? And I had to ask you that.
Definitely not linear.
Have you ever seen an instance of when something kind of sparks this massive change? Or does it kind of just happen gradually, kind of finding mentors as you go who do happen to believe in this and then getting lucky along the way?
Well, I hate to mention Harvey Weinstein, but I don't know if any of you get the Chronicle of Higher Education or read the Chronicle of Higher Education. There's an excellent article in the Chronicle called Abusers and Enablers in Faculty Culture. It's a terrific read, and it does reference kind of what happened. It references Harvey Weinstein, but it really is, if you think that it only happens in that industry, you're wrong. That it happens here in academia as well. And it's a terrific read. It's by K.A. Men. And it's really talking about that we normalize the things that happen, and like, I've heard Well, I went through that. That's just like a rite of passage, and the damage that does. The enablers that but he or she or they are really good people. Yeah, that may be the case that good people do harmful or hurtful things, and recognizing that, and just the destabilization of people. So just the small, like microaggressions and the micro inequities that kind of chip away at someone's self-worth or feeling, the can-do attitude, and how we all can recognize that. So it talks about the things that lead to inequity, but it also says if you've stood around and you've experienced this and haven't said anything, then you're enabling this. And so I think that there's small things that we all can do, even like in our own little networks, in our own everyday work, that really are critical. So I think that it can happen. There are some linear things. I think that it could happen. Like there's a flashpoint, and things happen. But I think that it's not one thing happens and then everything is wonderful. It's a series of ebbs and flows, and we need to be persistent for everyone. And we're talking about gender inequity. There's racial, ethnic, religion. There's inequity there. Ability and disability. There's a lot of different isms that are in play, and everyone in this room, including myself, is part of that group of isms at some point. As I get older, I'm part of the ageism, right? You can be able-bodied one day and not able to the next day. So it behooves all of us. It can't be, and it's wonderful to see. I learned something today that the Society of Women Engineers started here. I don't think people know that is enough. I didn't know that. So I am going to pass that along. And the he for SWE is, that's awesome. Yay. Just learned that too. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I don't think it is just linear. I think that there's spurts, and there's always work to be doing.
Somewhere I think a lot of progress is just starting to be made is the culture around mental health in academia, where it seems like that dam is just starting to break around the idea that like these norms about, oh, well, I did 16-hour days, 6 days a week, and so you should just do that too. And like how bad that is for your mental health for most people, not for everyone. I certainly couldn't do that and retain any kind of like good mental health. And then the idea of destigmatizing getting help as well, where like, especially if you are an underrepresented group, I end up being like, I'm the only woman in my lab. Sometimes that results in some weird stuff happening. And so like just having access, most graduate students, health insurance plans now will give you access to mental health resources, and taking the stigma off of using those is just kind of starting to happen. And I'm hoping that will have a ripple effect beyond just immediate implications for mental health and kind of lifestyle issues in grad school, to then help make things easier for various underrepresented groups as well, because having someone to talk to about those experiences who can be empathetic and helpful is wildly valuable.
All right, I guess now is a good time to take audience questions.
Yeah, does anybody have a question or a comment that they'd like to share? Cool.
Hi, I'm a grad student here in physics at Drexel, also 4th year. Yay. But my question is that, there's some point where it becomes too much. There's some point where, you're deciding that, is this my fight? And so how do you either move past that or seek help? And how do you not become jaded that this is such a big problem?
I will admit to being super jaded at the moment, like straight up. And it really does ebb and flow. I did hit a point at the start of my 3rd year where, so I was a rower in college, and I have a part-time job coaching rowing now. I applied to be the title is boatman, but boatwoman for the Indiana University crew team because I knew how to do all of the things you needed to do, and the only requirement was I'd be able to lift 40 pounds above my head, and I can do that. And so, like, I was so upset. I was so frustrated with my research. I was frustrated with how I was being treated by my peers. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to apply for this, and then if I get it, maybe I'll leave grad school. I did not get that job, but and by a couple of months later, I was kind of really just grinding it out, spending a lot of time talking through what was going on, and that was when I started therapy as well. But a couple of months later, I was like, okay, everything's like, not like all of my problems went away, but I felt better about it. I was no longer frustrated to the point of wanting to leave. But it's hard to say where to draw the line. The thing that usually when I get really frustrated keeps me in is thinking about, one, I really want to become faculty one day. I really want to teach, and I can't teach at a university and try and be a better and more inclusive professor than what I've experienced if I don't make it to the end of the line. At some days that doesn't feel like enough, but most days that's really what keeps me in it is if I can just hammer through, if I can just grind this out, I can make it so much better for people who come after me, and that is worth it to me. Again, some days that doesn't feel like enough, and those are the days where I go to therapy and cry. And that happens, and that's perfectly okay. Some days it feels like that. But everyone has to decide where the line is for themselves, too. Where most of my experiences have been microaggressive, and so I can, over time, via whatever defense mechanisms, like those just kind of stop, they hurt a little less, you learn how to deal with it. And so, like, I've been able to push past all of those. I also know people where, like, the accumulation of those has been worse, and they haven't, and that's, you have to set that point for yourself. I can't kind of tell you where to set that.
I can say one thing that I noticed from most STEM students, there is no law written that you have to do this by yourself, okay? There is no law that you have to do this by yourself, and you should not try to do this by yourself. So one thing we know, we let in way more engineering students than we can handle. There are not enough jobs for all these engineers. So if you notice, engineering usually has the biggest class, but you also know that the calculus class, the physics class, all those classes are what we used to call weed out classes, because we know we can't take all of you, right? So the system is designed that all of you are not going to make it. But those of you that do, there's something that kept you in it, right? So you have to remember what that was. And then the other thing is you got to identify people who are with you, okay? So you might party with certain people. You might study with other people. You need to determine who the different groups are and just understand you don't have to do this alone, right? And so in physics in particular, you can do problems all day, right? You can do every problem in the book, but that's not a great use of your time, right? So if you do these set of problems, then friend number one does these set of problems, and friend number two does these set of problems. And then you guys can help each other understand what it is that you don't understand. And then you go to the office hours and you help, your professor learn how to deal with people that look like you, right? So, they might not know, but if you keep coming, they'll learn because they have to keep talking to you, right? So the point is you don't have to do this by yourself. We're here, your TAs are here, your friends are here, and this is where you build the friends that you're going to have for the rest of your life. So start to build those real life connections and make sure that you help each other through this path, because you don't have to do it alone. And it's hard. Like she said, it's hard. We know science is not as easy, but it's doable, right? Somebody did it, so that means it's doable. And so you just got to figure out how is it doable for you and make sure you put those pieces in place. And like she said, on days when you just can't do it, you have to find somebody that can help you to be able to do it and know who those friends are.
I'm going to throw in here, some of the best advocates that I've seen have been professors who have completely just found themselves in that situation where they get swarmed by people for office hours. Usually those are the people who fortunately have enough gumption to say, I need help. And I love showing up, and there's already a bunch of members from SWE there. There's already a bunch of girls who are like, we need help, because I've noticed we study that way and we stick together that way. And you've got these professors who have to deal with the same girls all the time, and they end up becoming advocates for you just by being there and by teaching you properly without saying, well, you're back.
Right, exactly.
Very much like, great, you are really invested in this class.
Exactly.
I love it.
Exactly. And they'll remember your face when it comes time to grade because you came into their office hours. Especially if we're sitting in a class where it's over, let's say over 30, it's really difficult to remember everybody's name. You might remember your face, but when you're grading, if I remember you were in my office hours, then I know at least you put forth some sort of effort. So if you're on that borderline, then I might give you the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, also, if you have a hard time finding mentors or support systems at your own institution, look other places. I met several people over the last couple of years in my field who are at other institutions who've been incredibly supportive of me and been very willing to have a Skype call with me about how to deal with one of my collaborators being really microaggressive and how do I call this out without, realistically putting myself in a bad position either as someone who's still needs to get a postdoc about a year from now. And so there are people, even if they're not at your institution, who are very willing to help.
I would say no, it's kind of mimicking what you said. Know thyself.
Yeah.
What you need, and start early, and start building, understanding how do I care for myself and do that self-care, and identify people both personally and professionally that can support and care for you. Because you can't control everything, and there are some things that are out of your control, and hopefully they're going to be getting better over time. But there are things that you can control, like caring for yourself, knowing when is when, and getting a group of people that can care for you. I think that's a really key piece. Also know where your supports are. So if you're here at Drexel, be mindful of the faculty and know them and identify them before there's a crisis who you think can support you. And the Office of Equality and Diversity is there for you too. You can come and talk to us. We're expanding. My work. I think the opportunity for the work that we're doing is really on the proactive. We do coaching, conflict coaching. We do mediation and facilitated conversations. And so I've actually facilitated and mediated issues between faculty and students. And it was really eye-opening and a learning, that piece that we talked about earlier about they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And I had a student come who had an issue with an administrator. It was with the department head, and how they felt, how they perceived they were treated. And everyone has their own perspective. But they came and they wanted to do mediation. We laid out the options. They wanted to do mediation, and I reached out to the department head, and that person said, "Sure, I'll do it." And so this was in mediation allows for the caring for that power differential and facilitating that conversation where the student was able to give feedback to the department head in a very constructive way that person could hear. And it really was a learning experience. And I've done more of those over the years, and that's that is really the thing that makes my career path now is very rewarding when I get to do that. When people step forward and we help to support them. So I consider Office of Equality and Diversity could be one of your care, one of the places that you identify as a place for caring, and faculty. There are excellent faculty here at Drexel, both those that identify as male, female, and those that don't identify a specific gender. There's a lot of them. Look for them and know them ahead of time.
Michelle, I would like to ask real quick, what are the options for students who are experiencing issues for mediation?
Okay. So they can come to the Office of Equality and Diversity, and when someone comes to the Office of Equality and Diversity, we lay out all their options, and there are both informal options under our policies. We have two of the major policies. One is most people are aware now that Office of Equality and Diversity handles Title IX issues because there's been a lot of education about that the last number of years. This past week, we passed, the President's Cabinet passed a new policy which is called Discrimination, Harassment, and Bias Incident Prevention Policy. And we worked collaboratively with faculty and Senate, and it was a really long and involved process, but it was really a learning process. And talk about working in diverse groups, that diverse perspective of faculty and administrators and students, they all have different perspectives, but it has built within it, and faculty were adamant that they wanted the conflict resolution piece put to the forefront. So over the next year, we're going to be rolling out education on that and really helping to support faculty and student having direct conversations if they can. You're not required to, and then they can have a facilitated conversation, or they can have through the Office of Equality and Diversity a mediated a meeting where the power differential is something that is kind of watched through the conversation. So those are informal methods, and also we do conflict coaching. So that someone who feels that they're being treated differently, there's kind of a situation that they feel is maybe border on harassment, but they're not sure whether they want to file a formal complaint. We can coach them through how to address that issue that feels comfortable for them, because there are a lot of times where individuals don't want to come forward because they fear retaliation. Retaliation is prohibited, but there's still that real fear of, okay, it's prohibited, but will it still happen? So I think that utilizing those other means, the mediation, facilitated, and direct conversations, is a way that we really could make more headway in addressing these issues, because not everyone wants to file a formal complaint.
I'm going to open the floor back to questions if anybody has one. Marina.
So one thing I found is, how do you prevent inclusion from being forced? So a lot of times in jobs or in academia, it's like, okay, the groups now have to have one girl, one person of a certain race, that kind of thing, versus it being natural, like if you're hanging out with friends and if they are a group that just sort of is inclusive. So where do you guys think the line is, or how do you prevent that from happening? Because there's nothing more awkward than forced inclusion.
Right.
In my discussion sections, I always randomize groups, and so sometimes I end up with accidentally very homogenous groups, but since the groups change every discussion section, fine, that can happen that week, and then the next week maybe I will end up where there's one woman in every group. But that way, I would much rather do that and occasionally end up with homogenous groups than start tokenizing people. So that's my solution. I don't know that it's a great solution, but it's one that's easy to implement, so it's what I've done.
I think people don't know what they don't know. And so a lot of faculty in particular don't, or sometimes TAs don't really know that what they're doing is not advantageous for all of the groups that are in their sections or in their classes. And so offices like Equity, Equality and Diversity, now the new Center for Teaching and Learning, they're trying to get they're trying to get faculty on campus to be more aware of what it is that they do. Unfortunately, they're not trained, and so they just don't know. And so it is easier to just put people in groups. And most of the time, it's not an issue. But then every so often, you'll have groups where you just have personalities that don't work for a variety of reasons. And so it's difficult to tell a student to go to someone who has control over their grade and say, I don't want to be in this group because of X, Y, and Z. So it does put you in between a rock and a hard place. And so Like, we're trying, as a campus, we're trying to get faculty to become more aware, but it is a learning process. And, you know, unfortunately, we don't really have a good answer for that. We really don't, unfortunately.
Does anybody else have a good answer for that?
Well, I don't have an answer. I have another question. So, have any of you ever felt that you were that token person put into that group for diversity purposes? And if so, how did you handle it? What did you do? How did your peers in that group respond to you, and how did you deal with that?
I mean, usually all the time, basically. It's like, you know. So on the one hand, you hate to have to always be the person that they call to have this X type of representation. But on the other hand, you know that without your voice, there will be no voice. So part of the burden or the extra burden or whatever that we have to carry is that, yes, sometimes you're going to be the person in the group because they're having a panel talking about technology and there are no women on the panel. They're having a panel, or they're doing something, having a committee or having a group, and they're having a diversity committee and there are no diverse people on the committee. And so you know that your voice is needed, so you have to do it. But then on the other hand, you also have to put the onus back on the group to understand that just having me is not enough, and that there are a lot of different voices, there are a lot of things that we're not taking care of just by having me. And so what I've done in the past is to always remind the groups, the committees, the teams that we have to understand our environment and understand what we need, and if we can't get extra representation, then at least at some point we have to have other eyes look at whatever we're producing, developing, thinking about, because it's no longer acceptable to have all one religion, all one race, all one gender doing anything.
Yeah, this has proven a very interesting question for me, because I realize I haven't ever really thought about how do I process being the only woman in a group, because I've been doing that since before I really thought about doing it. But I think, so it depends on personality a little bit too. I am a very loud and assertive person and kind of am willing to throw myself out there and see what happens. And that's not something everyone's comfortable with, and that's okay. And so for me, I'm real willing to go out there and be like, this group is wildly unrepresentative and that is a problem. For other people, it's okay. It's enough to just, even if you are placed there as clearly the token diversity, that still matters. That's a start. That's something. Do the best you can with that. And then if you are comfortable speaking up and being louder and saying and doing more, say and do more. But you don't have to do things that make you wildly uncomfortable either. Work within the bounds of what works for you. Because if you're making yourself uncomfortable, it's not doing, at least immediately, you any good. It may not be as effective as you'd like it to be. So do what is going to work best for you within the confines of that.
I like the idea of the random assignment, even though it might not work out always to have a diverse group. That it addresses the issue of articulating every group must have at least one of this. I remember I was in law school. We had club sports. We had a club sport, and it was soccer. And in the club, there had to be a woman on each team. And so I was often one of those women on there. And while this wasn't directly with the curriculum, it was my experience with the other people who were in law school with me. And it really, it felt like there was, it changed the experience. It changed the experience in the game. It was very mindful that I was the female and that I had to be better, or it changed. I couldn't just be. So I think that the randomization piece, while not always the best, it is, I think it is preferable to kind of pinpointing one person on each as a token. But I also think that the more that each of us embrace and see our own role in building that inclusion of groups, so that it's not just the underrepresented minority or the female or the person who is in an underrepresented category, whether that's by sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, etc. That it doesn't have to be just them. It could be that we all support the inclusion of everyone, and there's things that you can do as a member of that group when you're not the minority, to help with inclusion. So I think that as we all become more mindful of how we include others into the meetings, into the discussion, that we all play a role in that.
Any more questions?
So sometimes it feels like there's no real good answer, good solution to something. So for example, for the making groups, randomizing can come up with lots of problems, like, personality mismatch, or people who you've seen in the past don't work well together, but your random process keeps putting them together in groups. Or like forcing like one girl in each group or one underrepresented in each group, like that has problems. Letting people choose their own thing often ends up with because all the girls found each other at the beginning of the term and became friends, they all just keep forming that group because they're all friends, not because they're doing it because they're girls, but they became friends. And so that's just an easy example of something that feels like it doesn't have a good solution. How do you guys deal with those situations where it's just no matter what you do, it feels like it's all there is never a way that the answer works?
I try to be really honest with my students when things like that come up. For me, as a student, I would be so much happier if a faculty member, someone was just this is the system I'm using because it's the best one I've come up with, or it's the most easily implementable for me. And if you guys have a better suggestion, let me know. Because that way, we're all on the same page, full disclosure, and then maybe one of my students will have a brilliant idea about a better way to do this that I can try. But also, it sounds like you guys recently got a Center for Teaching and Learning. Columbia has one, and that is an amazing resource for really innovative things you can do in discussion section or as a faculty member, even small changes to make your classroom more inclusive for different learning styles, different underrepresented groups, people with disabilities, and very simple things you can do that can help. It doesn't necessarily maybe in the specific context of groups per se help with that problem, but they are full of brilliant ideas from STEM education researchers, and a really wonderful resource.
Mm-hmm. I think having the expectation that you're going to have the perfect solution could prevent you from acting. So I think we shouldn't. There's no best solution always, and so what is effective? What is effective, and what can I do to kind of move the ball forward? I think, as you said, transparency. If a faculty member goes into a situation where there's going to be group development, and they say, I believe in inclusion and working in diverse groups, and so here's my method for doing that. This is the best thing that I've come up with. As you said, solicit creativity and coming up with a different formula, but just alone that faculty member articulating for the class, this is a priority for me. I believe in this, has a huge impact.
I think I've given up doing randomized groups just for those reasons.
Yeah.
And so for the most part, it does take longer to put your students in groups. So what I usually do is I will randomize them at first, but there are certain young ladies who I know are quiet, and I definitely will not put them in a group by themselves, especially when they are aggressive males sometimes in the class, or even when there's a loud woman in the class, that usually tells me that she can be the only woman in a group because she can hold her own. But if there are several women who seem like they're on the quieter side, I'll put them two together, or I will, or even with students from other countries who don't talk up in class a lot, putting them in groups that will allow them to come out in the group. And so that does take a little bit more time. And so if you have a lot of classes, faculty it's just really hard for them to have to, pay that much attention. But like when I was teaching the healthcare informatics class, I noticed nurses are very, there was always one nurse in the class, it was an online class, who would always welcome everybody to the class. Like that was that person's role. That is just part of the people that are drawn to that career. And I know in science and technology, people that are drawn to that career may or may not be the most outgoing. And so what I always put in my syllabus is that when you get in a workplace, you're not going to always work with your friends. So you can't have groups that are just your friends. Now, in class, we might have groups where it's just on the fly and you do think, pair, share. So, they might like pair with someone next to them. But if it's a long-term project, then I usually try to pick students from different majors, so they'll have, representation. I almost never put one person that's underrepresented in any way in a group by themselves, because it's just always, it very rarely leads to a successful outcome, right? So try to make sure the groups have people that can work together. And so it does come, you have to pay attention in class as you see people interact. You notice the person that always talks or that always sits in the front. You pay attention to those things, or you should anyway. But that does take a little bit of work. And so when people are assistant professors, that's something that they don't really, they don't pick up on that right away. And so sometimes it takes faculty a couple of years to get that kind of under their belt. But trying to work around those things, working around religious holidays. We just have to be, more flexible with what we do. And I think Drexel is a good place that can happen, but sometimes you do come up against faculty who are, there is no good solution. But I think we can always make a better solution. We can always make a better solution.
How are we doing on time? Questions?
Are there any more questions?
If you're hanging on to one.
Because we have time for like a little bit more. We'll just do a little bit more.
The Office of Equality and Diversity has given us goodies for anybody who's going to ask a question. So if something's been mulling in your head, please see Lexi, who will give you one.
Hi, I know Drexel SWE has he for SWE now, but in the classroom, how could male students, and especially in STEM, be a better ally or help out women out?
Can I take a stab at that?
Yeah, go for it.
It would be when you're working in teams, if you see that the female in your team doesn't feel, you sense that they don't feel comfortable or that they're not giving their voice, that you can encourage that. If they do have a contribution, you can recognize that. And be the support person for that, for bringing their voice and including their voice. Oftentimes, even if you disregard gender, race, ethnicity, etc., in meetings and in teams, oftentimes personality is key, right? And so the people who speak the loudest and the fastest are the people whose voice are heard. But everyone has a voice. Everyone has a perspective or something to contribute. So regardless of your role in the group, if you can be conscious of including everyone in the group, and that could be just making sure you go around. Anyone else have any other suggestions? And do it like kind of round robin. Anyone else? Okay. So that you're creating a framework for everyone to be able to contribute, even if they are not the loudest, if they're quiet, if that's expected, if you consistently do the round robin, they're gonna feel probably more comfortable giving voice or sharing their suggestions because they don't have to compete with the loudest. It's really just their turn to contribute. Something like that is a great way.
And then supporting or echoing the ideas of women in the group, because a lot of time when we'll say something and then like 10, 15 minutes later a man says it, and then it's a good idea. Right. And so when that happens, acknowledge that one of the women in the group said it 10 minutes ago, or when she says it right away, like throw support behind it right away. And I like this about, on a lot, where you can, having everyone speak, it helps people who would wait a little longer to speak up normally. It helps people who are maybe non-native English speakers and would be more reticent to just like jump right in. And then in class, wait a moment to raise your hand. Unless it's like a very urgent question or something, because just on average, it's usually men who are going to be the most aggressive about raising their hands to answer things in class. And whatever the like cognitive reasons for people, especially I think statistics are supposed to be like women, it's the strongest in like waiting and thinking about it a little like longer before raising their hand to give an answer in class. And so like for faculty, just by waiting an extra 5 to 10 seconds to decide who you call on, you'll get more hands. And so then correspondingly, being a little bit less aggressive about that, if that's something normally you'd be aggressive about, give your peers the opportunity to kind of take their turn giving a response.
I mean, treat her like a human being, so just like she has a brain, she also, thinks, and just like you have certain friends who talk a lot, you have other friends who are very boisterous. You know how to deal with them. Think of all of the people in your class. Everybody has a personality, that's their own. They are not the one representative of whatever it is. They are not the only representative of that. And don't expect them to be that. Expect them to be who they are. And so I think if you treat everybody like, you would like to be treated, we learned in kindergarten, use your words, not your, just use your words, and I think we'll be in a better place. Don't make assumptions. Ask if you don't know. Especially don't touch. Ask first. Just real common things. Common things. Well, I guess they're not common. So let's
make it common.
Make it common. Yes, exactly.
Often it feels like if you aren't the person up here talking about diversity and inclusion and you're willing enough to be on a panel for it, then you don't really qualify as the person who, like the woman in STEM or the underrepresented minority in STEM. Then you're just somebody who's there. And that's absolutely not true. There are people who don't have their just personality is not really the person who's going to be talking about this, but they do enough that they just go under the radar. Yeah, treat people like humans. It's great advice. Any questions? Any extra time for questions?
I think we could talk about this for like years, but we have to take a little bit of a break before the professional panel with like 5 amazing professional who are going to share their experiences, which are all very relevant to us because we go on co-op, and that's where stuff gets real sometimes, as we all know. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to share your own lives and lessons and your own advice, your own stories. So when you're leaving the room, there are papers on the right side. There's note cards and regular papers, and you can write your own advice, write your own story, anything you can think of that you would like to share with the audience, and bring them to me or collect them, or I'll be there when we come back in for the second time. And it'll be totally anonymous. Don't write your name if you don't want to, and we'll have volunteers read the submissions. So it'll be somebody reading your story that is not you, somebody different from you, and we'll see what everybody has to say. So please participate if you feel comfortable with it.
One last plug, just since you said co-op, the Office of Equality and Diversity is available for support as well when you go out into co-op. If you're experiencing any issues with regard to gender, any discrimination, harassment, just you're not sure what this situation is, please reach out to us. We support you in that as well.
Is there anything else, Nora?
A round of applause for our amazing panel.
Thank you. We'll be back in here in about 40 minutes. Please keep getting food and write your stories down on the papers and visit the booths that are on the other side of the room.
Yeah, I know, right? So, absolutely.